شكراً ألينا ولضيوفك الكرام على هذه الجلسة المثمرة. تسهم الشراكات الفعالة في تحسين النمو المهني للمعلمين من خلال تسهيل التعاون والتعلم المشترك. يعد التفاعل مع المنظمات المجتمعية مصدراً قيماً للموارد والفرص. نرحب بكم في جلسة النقاش التالية التي يديرها دكتور تيد بورينتون، وهو عميد مؤسس في أكاديمية الشارقة للتعليم الإمارات العربية المتحدة. وعنوان الجلسة هو دور الشراكات في التحسين المستمر للتربويين ونموهم المهني.
Thank you, Alina, and the panelists for an insightful session. Effective partnerships can drive continuous improvement and career growth for educators by facilitating collaboration and shared learning. Engaging with colleagues and community organizations provides valuable resources and mentorship opportunities. Join our next discussion panel, moderated by Dr. Ted Parrington, Founding Dean at Sharjah Education Academy in the UAE. The title of the session is Strategies for Continuous Improvement and Career Growth for Educators Through Partnerships. Dr. Ted, the floor is yours. You may start.
Thank you very much, and good evening to everyone. I'm really happy to be here with all of you and with my colleagues. We're supposed to have another person. I don't know if Saima is here. If not, we will have a very rich discussion with those of us who are. First of all, Ray Dam is the CEO of Excel, a US-based nonprofit organization that works with children and adults with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And Cameron Mirza, Chief of Party for the USAID Early Grades Education Activity in Jordan, which works with the government of Jordan and universities in the country to increase the quantity and quality of teachers across the country. If we have our third panelist join us, I'll introduce her when she arrives. So welcome, Ray, and welcome, Cameron. We're going to have an opportunity to talk about something that is deeply essential to the work that we do in teacher preparation and school improvement and educator development, which is partnership at an organizational level for the development of our local community educators, but tapping into global networks and global intellectual communities in order to make sure that we are providing the highest level of quality, instrumental level of service, and support to our school and educator communities. So I'll begin by a question with Ray. I'd like you to, if you don't mind, begin our panel, Ray, by discussing a little bit about how partnerships between organizations can help facilitate improvement and career growth for teacher development, especially in environments where the labor force, and especially the teacher labor market, is evolving and changing over time. And how you and your organization and others that you work with engage in part work to develop school-based and community-based education development.
Sure. Yeah. Well, first and foremost, it's an absolute pleasure to be here. Ted, thank you for leading us through the discussion. Big thank you to QRTA for hosting this fantastic event, and thank you all for the participants who are tuning in on your Sunday evening. I think partnerships play an extremely important role in working to develop solutions and tools and resources for continuous growth and development for its professionals. And really and truly the most important tool or variable in our own toolbox, which is our teachers. And I think a lot of that has to do with a couple of main factors. The first and foremost is no one single organization, company, or government entity is going to have all of the answers, is going to be an expert on every single thing that is required to be able to continuously increase the bar of our education systems and our educational results. So by the very definition, right, a partnership brings together more than one group or groups of people or organizations to solve a specific need, whether that's a market need or a social need, right? It brings groups together and by definition pulls us outside of ourselves, and it makes us bigger, more valuable, and more capable than we would be by ourselves. And I think partnerships allow us the opportunity to do that and allow us to do the next important thing, I think, which is augment our weaknesses. So I think that's even more true in an environment that's dynamic, an environment that is growing, a labor force that's developing. As Ted mentioned, we're based in the United States originally. We're nearly 45 years old. And about 6 years ago, I moved into Saudi Arabia and developed the first holistic special education center in Saudi Arabia. And largely speaking, that workforce was very, very talented. And there were a lot of really fantastic professionals there, but there weren't a lot of practical applications because of the lack of providers. So we went through this exact purpose, an exact problem to try to work to develop the workforce there. And I think part of what we were trying to accomplish was so much bigger than ourselves, right? We were relatively moderately sized not-for-profit organization that had very, very lacking resources. And the impact that we could have by ourselves became very, very clear that we wouldn't be able to accomplish it ourselves. So we had to look to augment those weaknesses by partnering with much stronger groups who specialize in areas where we didn't. And I think partnerships very much allowed us to do that. And I think an additional thought around that is it's interesting whether you look at, regardless of what you look at in terms of a structure of an organization or entity, for-profit, not-for-profit, government, education is a very unique environment where you have a singular goal. And that singular goal is to provide the best possible product and the best possible outcomes you can. And I think that sort of evens the playing field and brings people together and really primes a platform for collaboration to share things that you may not see and to create collaborative opportunities that you may not see replicated in other industry environments. So it's very, very unique and very special.
That's wonderful. Can I ask you, Ray, maybe talk a little bit about who you are as an organization today? If you were to describe your organization as it exists right now, on its own, without partners, without your collaborative organizations, who are you as an organization as you want to be seen on your own? And then, if you don't mind, maybe elaborate. And going back to what you just said before, how do those partnerships make your organization better?
Very deep questions. Just starting off early. So I think to answer the first question, who we are and what we want to be seen as. Who we are at our very basic core is an organization, as you mentioned, that works with children and adults who have intellectual or developmental disabilities. Right? We work with individuals as young as 18 months old who are being assessed, evaluated, and diagnosed for said reasons. And we also work with individuals through early intervention programs, special education programs, and adult vocational training programs, right, across the sort of spectrum of diagnoses or disability. But I think more importantly, what we want to be seen as is a catalyst, right? Is a catalyst for change. And you know, education is such a dynamic and exciting environment, which is kind of fun and interesting because it's also probably one of the oldest, if not the oldest profession, right? But special education even goes further, right? And special education is an interesting environment itself because it hasn't changed much. In the areas where it has a developed infrastructure. It's relatively unchanged for 50 years in the United States or 40 years in the UK, right? And most other places around the world. But what's so great about special education in this particular region in the Middle East is It's making very quick strides. And there's so much demand to provide these much needed services for a vulnerable population. We like to be seen, or hope to be seen, as a catalyst for serving with the highest level of integrity for this population that's really experiencing services for the first time. And I think that latter piece goes into your second question, Ted, and that is, how have partnerships shaped our organization? Very, very quick, very, very easily. We wouldn't be able to be doing the work we're doing in Saudi right now without our main partner, which was Saudi Aramco, who brought us in and has been just instrumental in the funding of this incredible social need. Right, we're serving over 350 families right now. We have almost 400 staff members. We've built out kind of the continuum of care, none of which would be possible without a partner like that who saw a social need and worked to help make it possible financially. But I think the other side of that is we were a small nonprofit from the Southwest part of the United States. We didn't know anything about working in this region, this geography. Without the partnerships of some very, very key, not just other organizations, but very key people to help adapt our model and make it most appropriate and impactful for the local community, it never would have been able to keep on. So I think it's very safe to say that left to our own devices, we wouldn't be able to be making an impact. And I think that sort of translates to where the industry is now, specifically within Saudi, is as the government becomes closer and closer to creating a national solution for special education supports, just like in the United States, where a light switch went off and overnight we were required legally to serve, I think it was 3.5 million children, right? Whenever that level of demand goes from zero, not to 100 miles an hour overnight, there's a tremendous demand that exists. So seeing that happen, we have this very significant responsibility as an industry, as an educational industry, and as specialists to start building capacity within the workforce, not just in Saudi, but across the region, because every other Gulf company that I have visited is very, very similar in nature. Hopefully that answered your question.
Indeed, it's interesting. I think Saudi Arabia is on a very large scale testing out quite a few strategies of partnership and development. Jordan has a very long and rich history of being at the center of, I think, a huge number of partnerships, development projects, and initiatives. Cameron, you are right in the middle of that, a country that is no stranger to collaboration across the world. There's been multiple universities and development agencies working on really ramping up teacher development and educational achievement. You're in the middle of the work of connecting international development with universities, with schools, with government agencies. Can you talk a little bit about what that looks like on the ground and how all of those entities come together to achieve the goal of raising student achievement, student learning, and educational advancement?
Thanks, Ted. Again, as Ray said, take the opportunity to congratulate QRTA on another successful conference. It's always a pleasure to work and support QRTA in their mission of improving teacher education, not just in Jordan, but across the region. I think we've got some chronic problems globally when it comes to teaching. So UNESCO estimate that 44 million additional teachers are needed by 2030. And that puts an incredible strain on education systems. It means that countries have got to have the right policies to recruit, train, and keep the best teachers in the workforce. And it requires policies that really support teacher motivation, well-being, career pathways, and equitable access to professional development. and all of which comes at a cost. And you're quite right to say that within Jordan, there are donors that play a part in this. But really, when we think about the policy framework for many countries, developing countries, they often really fail to sustain any meaningful change in teaching practices, because the changes are not at a systems level. And I think that's where the role of donors come in, and wider partnerships to try and sustain those gains long term across the system. But there are obviously pitfalls that we need to consider. I think firstly, how teachers perceive and respond to policy, and failing to secure the conditions for teachers' policies to both drive and sustain changes at scale has been a common problem. And therefore, the work that we do in particular around teacher policy, it's really important that we develop, policies are developed to really support continuous improvement. In fact, they must be clear, they must be doable, and they must be rewarding for teachers. And on top of that, they need to be properly financially costed and having the capable delivery systems to ensure that changes are effectively delivered. So I think what that means is that partnerships, governments, donors, NGOs really need to think about the operational feasibility of reforms, resources, funding, technical expertise, management, and as well as having the being politically acceptable. And certainly in Jordan's history over the last few years, there's been huge political will to drive improvement in teacher education. And I think that the only way that these policies can really work over the long term and to have long-lasting impact is to build coalitions through a wide range of partners. But it's important that partnerships must be absolutely clear to what the challenges are, and to really work in unison with government and organizations to really drive sustainable change over a long period of time. And I think that's the challenge now for many countries. The impetus is there, the political will is there. There's very interesting partnership models in place, but I think it's really about sustaining it over a long period and creating those conditions, Ted, which I think the challenge is it remains for countries like Jordan and other countries in the Arab world.
Could I ask you to elaborate on a couple points, in particular, when some of the practices that are disseminated through some of these partnerships, especially from the international actors that are working within the country and really work to build capacity and bring cutting edge ideas and strategies. What does that look like long term in terms of the work that teachers are doing in schools? How do you work to make sure that those practices are sustained long term, well after the partners leave and the project's end?
So I think that's a great question. I mean, the short answer, one word answer, is accountability. That's the short answer. But I think it's obviously far more complex than that. So if you think about how do we drive continuous improvement throughout the system long term, it is expensive. That's one key consideration. But I think we need to look at it in terms of the system. And what do I mean by the system? Pre-service, in-service, and post-service. So the challenges that many countries have faced over the last 10 years or so has been that there's been huge amounts of effort required to run professional development for in-service teaching. And that is very expensive to do. And the main reason for that is that the pre-service quality hasn't really been aligned with teacher standards. So there's always been a bit of a gap between novice teachers coming into the workforce and the requirements of the classroom. So I think the lack of alignment has been a huge problem here, and I think universities do have a role to play in teacher education, but they do need to step up. They do need to step up and become more integrated within the school system. I think there needs to be an increased focus on relevant curriculum within the pre-service, high quality experiential learning, competency-based, and a transformation of student assessment to a more balanced, formative and summative approach. So there's a lot of work to be done on pre-service. I am optimistic given the efforts over the last few years, and I've worked personally with QRTA on some of this through a teaching diploma, and I think the impact will be over the long term very positive. I feel on the in-service side, the challenges have always been around the relevance to the teaching profession, and I think really moving towards more self-paced CPD, linking that to career progression and delivery models which are innovative by working with NGOs, the private sector, more school-to-school community of practice approach, even leveraging open source resources, I think would be the smart way to go. But really, we need to think about the teaching profession like we do in many industries, Ted, as lifelong learning. And I think the kind of universities' opportunities really to establish themselves as centres of excellence for the teaching profession, but they do need to prove themselves, and they need to build confidence that they can play that role, and it does require a different approach. And certainly I see a future of more practitioners being involved in the teaching at universities. And it does really require regular and accurate data flows from the school system to allow universities to be quicker, more responsive to the needs of teachers. And that is hard to do. I think the lag is quite slow at the moment. So I think really it does need to move away from a short-term approach to more longer-term thinking, more structured, longer-term professional development, leveraging technology and innovation, improved use of data analytics, and a different model in terms of how do we tackle some of these longer-term challenges. So I think in summary here, Jordan has really made great strides over the last decade. There is a lot to do, but I think the path is very clear, and I think Jordan is moving very nicely along it.
Ray, back to you. The Middle East is really coalescing around a lot of core ideas, strategies, and policies that support children and youth with learning needs. And I think as each country furthers its policies and its strategies and its funding, we're all, excited about the sorts of opportunities that will materialize. But I think for many families and maybe some educators, we're still trying to figure out how to access support or knowledge or resources or experts. Can you talk a little bit about what you see going on in the region right now, and maybe some tips and suggestions you could provide about what the next few years of support for learning needs and students with learning needs might go through and experience, what some of their families and their schools and maybe some of their communities can either expect, or what they should do, how to access resources, and how to make those connections in a way that is not just about being supportive of individual concerns, but wider, comprehensive support within a school or within a.
Sure. Yeah, it's a very, very thorough question. So if we start running close on time, please wave your arms or cut me off. So I think first and foremost, again, it's such an exciting time for this particular subsect of the educational industry in this region. I'm not aware of any one particular government that isn't making significant strides towards moving towards sort of a national solution for serving students, like you see in so many other parts of the world. In terms of, we'll go to the first part, which is accessing the care. I think one thing that is true is there's proliferation of services and options for every sort of circumstance in every sort of country that we can think of within this particular region. And I break that into two buckets, really. You have the healthcare approach, the medical approach, and then you also have the educational approach, right? And I'll group vocational training and education together. But you're seeing sort of the more traditional care for individuals who fall within this category in this region tend to focus on sort of the medical approach. You go to a hospital, you get treated by a physical therapist, an occupational therapist, a speech therapist, et cetera, right? That continues to be present and most available, right? That industry itself is actually growing quite significantly, again, across the Gulf region. When we look at the education side of that, that's a lot slower to take hold. But I think the understanding is very much there. And part of that understanding stems from the fact that you have these programs, these individual programs, again, across the entire Arab-speaking world that have popped up in localities and geographies as a part of a philanthropic individual or family or a government who have established, this particular ad hoc solution. And those fill up very, very, very quickly. So you see capacity building and capacity also filling up quite quickly. Realistically speaking, though, special education is an expensive proposition. It's more expensive than general education because it requires some additional specialists. And I think just speaking to the participants today, if you're looking for a way for a career trajectory and stability, being a special educator is going to be a very exciting time in this particular region because there are so few practitioners. Right, you can really kind of write your own trajectory if you move into this particular sector. So the demand is going to be absolutely dramatic. But I think until you see governments developing national solutions or finding ways to subsidize the education component, it's going to be very hard to see sort of en masse these types of provisions coming up because they're too expensive. I mean, even in very developed countries, education has to be subsidized because it can be cost prohibitive. And especially in this part of the world, we've confirmed and seen even more of families with multiple children who have special education requirements within one family. So being cost prohibitive in one situation, certainly in two, it's even more so. So I think I was going to say rhetoric, but that has a negative connotation. But I think the awareness is continuing to grow. And I think one thing this region has done exceedingly well, more so than my home country, the United States, is there's this tremendous focus on inclusive education, right? And the definition of inclusive education is quite wide, right? But when you get down to core philosophical questions, majority, if not all of students can and should be educated with their neurotypical peers. A lot of the governments in the countries around this region have got that absolutely right. Philosophically, it makes sense. It's also the most cost-effective way to provide special education, and it provides the most amount of growth opportunities for that individual. And I would also argue their neurotypical peers. So I think we're going to see more of that. You've seen that in communications in the UAE. You've seen that in communications in Saudi Arabia. You've seen that in some communications in Qatar as well. So I still think that that is probably going to see the biggest sort of growth over the coming years. And from a commercial perspective, I do think you'll see kind of the continual growth of the sort of the medical or healthcare side of this dream, but obviously it's incredibly vital to surround that with early intervention, educational, and then people tend to forget that students become adults, right? And it's very important to be a contributing member to the community, and that requires additional partnerships, such as universities being ready to educate and work with neurodivergent individuals. So there's a lot of opportunity. As Cam said earlier, there's also a lot of work to be done. But the great thing is people are doing it. People are doing it. But as Dr. Cam also said, until you have regulation and compliance that come in and governments say this has to be done, right, to level the playing field for everyone and make it a priority, it probably won't become a priority.
So I would like to welcome anyone, if you'd like to put some questions in English or Arabic into the chat. We're happy to take those. And the first one that I'd like to raise comes just a few minutes ago from Enos, who says, there's a possible gap between teacher styles and, for example, a first grade teacher versus a second grade teacher might have a completely different approach. Cameron, I thought maybe you could talk a bit about this. There's on the one hand, we all know historically and in popular culture, teachers are individuals who express their own distinctive views. But in these types of partnerships that we've developed, there's an essential belief and fundamental philosophy that we want to make sure that teachers are following internationally recognized standards of practice, following empirical evidence in their work as educators. How do you bridge that, where you encourage teachers to be individuals and to follow their passion as educators and human beings, but also using these partnerships to make sure that they are also really well equipped with international best practice?
Yeah, it's a great question too. I mean, absolutely. I mean, look, teaching is really it's all about passion. No passion, no points. I think the best teachers are the ones that are the most passionate and have the biggest hearts. But passion alone is probably not enough to deliver the types of student outcomes required. And so I think some of the great many countries now are kind of following this the gold standard, which is the CAPE accreditation, to ensure that the teacher preparation programs meet international standards, which is a great start, of course. And I think some of the kind of key principles that underpin CAPE accreditation would be focusing quite rightly on the teaching and learning approach and the pedagogy. And I think we look at classrooms around the region now, and often they are overcrowded, particularly in the public school sector, and it does require teachers to have a different skill set. And I think that focusing more on the kind of ability of teachers from a pedagogical perspective to teach at the right level, to ensure differentiated learning approaches within the classroom is becoming more and more critical. I think the focus on how do we embed social emotional learning across the curriculum and make sure that we have an inclusive classroom is becoming even more critical. I mean, I think when you think about what's required from teachers now, they need to have understanding of cognitive behavior, behavioral science, data analytics. The way things are moving is that the future of teaching is that of a learning scientist, and that requires an incredible amount of upskilling and reskilling for teachers. And I think that the practices in terms of what does that mean from a partnership model. I think the best partnerships are often just peer-to-peer, school to school, creating clusters of schools. Twinning programs where practitioners can learn from each other, I think, is a very sustainable way of affecting change in the classroom. But beyond that, organisations, NGOs, which come to the table with relevant experience, cutting-edge knowledge, and ideas to inspire teachers. I think are becoming even more important. And on top of that, I think technology companies have got a huge role to play as AI particularly starts to take a bigger grip on education, and educators and schools and school leaders tend to lean into the possibilities that AI can bring in the classroom, and not just from the perspective of the learner, but importantly, taking a lot of the burden off teachers in the classroom and doing some of the heavy lifting. We know that teachers spend far too much time on paperwork, and I think there's a real opportunity there. So I think there is great opportunity, but I also think it really does need, particularly at school level, strong leadership to embrace these opportunities and to create those strategic partnerships which really allow the practitioner to flourish over the long term.
Well, thank you. I think we will end it here. This has been a really enriching discussion. Thank you, Ray. Thank you, Cameron. This has been a very enjoyable experience to better understand how we all, in all of our different organizations and institutions, can support each other for a common goal. So thank you, and thank you all in attendance tonight for your participation, for your questions, and for your interest in this enjoyable and exciting topic. And thank you especially to the Queen Rania Teachers Academy for hosting this wonderful event. We're really privileged, all of us, to be part of this and to be part of the dialogue on partnership and educator development and educational excellence. So thank you all.